In 1963, a man in central Turkey picked up a sledgehammer and swung it at his own basement wall. He was renovating his home, that's all. A little more room, a little more storage, the most ordinary reason in the world to knock down a wall. But when the plaster and stone finally gave way, he didn't find dirt behind it, he found darkness. A cold draft breathing out of a hole that had no business being there, in a passage that dropped straight down into the earth beneath his house. He couldn't see the bottom. So he did what anyone would do, he told people, and word climbed until the archaeologists came. And when those archaeologists lowered themselves through that hole in a nobody's basement in a quiet Anatolian town, what they walked into stopped them cold. It wasn't a cellar, it wasn't a tomb, it was a city. A city carved entirely out of solid rock, plunging 18 stories straight down, deeper than a 20-story building is tall. Level after level after level of rooms, corridors, staircases, and halls hollowed from the stone by human hands. There were stables down there, with the grooves where animals had been tied. There were kitchens with soot still on the ceilings. Wine presses, oil presses, storage rooms big enough to feed an army, chapels, schools, wells, and genuine, breathable, livable room for as many as 20,000 people. An entire city, underground, sealed, silent, hidden so completely that a whole modern town had been living, sleeping, and farming directly on top of it for who knows how many generations, without a single soul realizing that beneath their feet lay one of the largest and most sophisticated underground structures ever built by human beings. And here is the part that turned a local curiosity into a worldwide obsession. Nobody knows for certain who built it. Nobody knows exactly when. And most disturbing of all, nobody can say for sure what they were hiding from that would make 20,000 people carve a metropolis 85 meters into the earth and seal the doors behind them from the inside. This is the mystery of Derinkuyu. And I promise you, by the end of this video, the reason it was built will be far stranger and far more unsettling than a hidden basement has any right to be. This is Motec. The town is called Derinkuyu, and the name itself is a quiet clue. In Turkish, it means deep well, because for centuries, the people who lived here dug wells that went down astonishingly far and drew up cold, clean water, and never quite asked themselves why the ground beneath their town was riddled with shafts. The man renovating his home had been dealing with a small nuisance for a while. Strange things kept happening around his property depending on which version of the story you hear. His chickens kept vanishing into a gap in the wall, or cold air kept leaking from somewhere it shouldn't, or water drained away too fast. Little wrongnesses. The kind of thing you notice and ignore for years. Until the day the wall came down and the little wrongness turned out to be the top of a passage leading into a void the size of a small town. Once the experts arrived, the true scale revealed itself slowly, because there was so much of it. They mapped one level and found stairs down to another. They mapped that one and found a tunnel to a third, and a fourth. And it kept going. 18 levels in total, reaching a depth of about 85 meters. And archaeologists believe not even all of it has been fully cleared and open to this day. Whole sections remain choked with debris, sealed off, unexplored. What they were standing inside was not a rough dugout. It was engineered. It had a logic to it, a plan. And that plan had been executed with such patience and precision that people would eventually argue about how it was even possible. But we'll come back to the engineers, and to the eerie fact that they left no name behind. For now, imagine you're one of the first to go down. Imagine you are there. Pause for a moment and put yourself at the top of that passage. In 1963, with a lamp in your hand and no idea what's below. You step down into the first level, and the temperature drops. It's cool here, and it stays cool. The rock holds a steady chill, no matter what the season is doing up on the surface. Your light catches the walls, and they're not natural cave walls, they're worked. Smooth in places, chiseled in others, shaped into rooms with doorways and arched ceilings, and little carved niches where a lamp would have sat. You move deeper. A staircase, cut from the living rock, curves down into the black. You pass a wide, low chamber and realize from the troughs carved into the floor that this was a stable animals lived down here, this far below the sun. Further along, there's a room with two great circular stone basins, a press for making wine or oil. Then, storage rooms, dozens of them, their walls lined with hollows for jars. And then you come to it, the thing that makes the hair on your neck stand up. Set into the side of a corridor is an enormous circular stone, like a great wheel of rock as tall as you are, weighing perhaps half a ton. It sits in a carved track, and you understand instantly what it's for. Someone could roll it across the passage and seal it shut, and, crucially, it could only be moved from one side, from the inside. These people didn't build a cellar to keep their wine cool. They built a door to keep something out. You keep descending, level after level. The air impossibly stays fresh. You pass a cross carved into a wall, a chapel. You pass what might have been a school. You go so deep that when you finally stop and think about how far below the surface you are, the sunlight and the sky and the whole world above start to feel like a rumor. And one question is pounding in your skull with every step. Who does this? Who carves an entire world beneath the earth, and what were they so afraid of that they sealed the way back home? Here is where it gets strange. How deep and how many? Let's put real numbers to it, because the numbers are the first thing that break your brain. Derinkuyu goes down roughly 85 meters, about 280 feet. That's the height of a building of 20-plus stories, except carved downward into solid rock as a series of connected levels, 18 of them. And this wasn't a shelter for a family or a village. At its fullest, Derinkuyu could hold up to 20,000 people, and not just people, their livestock, their food stores, everything a population needs to survive, not for a night, but for weeks or months at a stretch, without ever setting foot on the surface. Think about what that actually requires. 20,000 human beings breathing underground. That's air. That's water. That's food and waste and light and the slow madness of the dark, all of it, solved, engineered into the rock. There were communal kitchens, so the whole population could be fed. There were wells sunk so deep they reached the water table far below. There were wine and oil presses, so the essentials could be produced down here, not hauled from above. There were religious spaces, so the community's spirit didn't collapse in the black. This was not a hole to hide in. This was a functioning society with the lights off. And Derinkuyu is soft rock volcanic tuff, ash spat out by the great volcanoes of the region eons ago and compacted into stone that is comparatively easy to carve when fresh and then hardens on exposure to air. That's the one gift nature gave the builders. But a gift of material is not a gift of labor. Someone still had to remove all of it, by hand, ton after ton after ton, and carry it up and out, and we'll get to exactly where all that missing rock went, because it's a problem. First, the deeper riddle. How old is it? When was Derinkuyu built, and by whom? This is where the ground gives way beneath you, because the honest answer is, we're not sure. There is no plaque, no foundation stone, no royal decree that says, in such and such a year, I, King so-and-so, ordered this city dug. For a structure this enormous, that silence is deafening, and I'll tell you exactly why that silence matters so much later in the video. What we have are two main candidates. The first is the Phrygians, an Iron Age people who dominated this part of Anatolia around the 8th and 7th centuries before Christ. That's the most widely accepted theory for the original excavation. The second, older and more startling possibility, is the Hittites, the great Bronze Age power of the region, which would push the first carvings back toward 2,000 years before Christ, roughly 4,000 years ago. But here's the twist that makes dating it a nightmare. Derinkuyu was not built once. It was built and expanded again, across an astonishing span of time. Whoever cut the first levels, later peoples inherited it and dug deeper. Early Christians, hiding from Roman persecution and later from waves of raids, moved in and enlarged it dramatically, adding the chapels, carving crosses into the walls, leaving Greek inscriptions behind. The city grew downward across centuries, maybe millennia, each generation adding to a project none of them would ever see finished. The Derinkuyu we walk today is a palimpsest, a thing rewritten over and over by frightened people across thousands of years. Which leaves us staring at a monument built by many hands over an unknowable stretch of time for a reason nobody wrote down. The city had no intention of explaining itself. It only wanted to ask harder questions. So let's ask them. Mystery 1. How was it carved? How did they dig 18 levels into solid rock by hand? Yes, the tuff is soft, but don't let that word do too much work. Soft rock is still rock. To carve 18 connected levels, descending 85 meters with rooms, arched ceilings that don't collapse, staircases, tunnels, ventilation shafts, and wells reaching the water table using nothing but hand tools, is a feat of engineering that would challenge people today. They had to get the angles right, or the ceilings would come down on their heads. They had to understand load, and where the rock could be safely hollowed, and where it had to be left thick to hold the weight of everything above. They had to plan the descent so that the levels connected, so that air could move, so that water could be reached. And they had to do all of it working in the dark, by lamplight, deep enough that a single mistake could bury a work crew alive. And then there's the problem that quietly haunts the whole site: the missing rock. When you hollow out a city this size, you produce a staggering volume of debris, thousands upon thousands of tons of excavated stone. Every room, every corridor, every level is space that used to be filled with solid rock, and all of that rock had to go somewhere. It had to be broken loose, gathered, and carried up and out of the tunnels, load by back-breaking load. So where is it? There's no mountain of tailings beside the town, no obvious quarry heap marking where a city's worth of rock was dumped. It was moved and dispersed and hidden by time. But the sheer logistics of it, the organized labor it implies, points to something we'll come back to. That's not even the strangest part. Mystery 2. How did they breathe? How do you keep 20,000 people and their animals alive, 85 meters underground? Air is the thing that should have killed this idea in the planning stage. Pack 20,000 people and their livestock into a sealed space far below the earth, light their lamps and cooking fires, and within hours, the air should turn foul and deadly. Underground, ventilation isn't a comfort. It's the entire difference between a refuge and a mass grave. The builders solved it. Derinkuyu is threaded with more than 50 vertical ventilation shafts, engineered to draw fresh air down from the surface and circulate it through all 18 levels, so that even in the deepest chambers, the air stays breathable. Think about the sophistication buried in that sentence. They understood, without any of our science, how air moves through a structure. They designed a system that could keep a fire lit and a crowd alive at the bottom of a stone pit, and they got it right, at a scale of 20,000 souls. And the crown jewel of that system is a single shaft that plunges around 55 meters down and does two jobs at once. In its lower reaches, it passes through the water table, making it a well so the people below could draw clean water without ever exposing themselves on the surface. And in its upper reaches, it carries air, water and breath, from one shaft, engineered 1,000 or more years before anyone here had heard the word engineer. So how did people, supposedly this primitive out, think a problem that would trouble a modern architect? Of course, the mysteries don't end there. Mystery 3. The doors that lock from inside. Why seal a city from within? Come back to those great rolling stones, because they may be the most revealing thing in the entire complex. At intervals throughout Derinkuyu sit massive circular doors carved from stone, each weighing anywhere from a few hundred kilos to over a ton, set into tracks so they can be rolled across a passage to seal it completely. And every detail of their design tells the same grim story. They were operated from one side, only the inside. A person sheltering within could roll the stone shut and hold the passage. A person outside, in the corridor, could not easily move it at all. They had a hole through the center, which some believe allowed the defenders to see out, or to thrust a spear through at anyone trying to break in. And critically, each level could be sealed off separately, so that even if an enemy breached one door, they'd be trapped in a killing corridor, facing another sealed stone, with the population retreating deeper and locking level after level behind them. You do not build a defensive system like that for storage. You do not seal your own home from the inside, level by level, unless you are genuinely, existentially afraid that something is coming for you, something you fully expect to arrive at your door and try to get in. The Rolling Stones are not a mystery of how, they are a mystery of why, what was coming. Of course, the questions don't stop there. In fact, we're about to reach the two biggest mysteries of Derinkuyu, the two that have kept archaeologists, historians, and everyone who's ever stood at the bottom of that dark shaft arguing for 60 years. The two biggest mysteries. Okay, so here's where we are. We've got an 18-level city carved 85 meters into solid rock. It could hold 20,000 people and their animals. It has stables, kitchens, wine and oil presses, wells, chapels, and schools. It's ventilated by more than 50 shafts. And it can be sealed from the inside with rolling stone doors, level by level, against an enemy. Now, the two questions that make all of that so much worse. The first is the one I promised to return to the silence. For a structure of this magnitude, we have almost nothing in the written record telling us who built it or when. Empires in this region were record keepers. They carved their victories into stone. They wrote down their kings, their taxes, their wars. And yet here is one of the largest underground constructions on Earth, dug over centuries, and the people who began it left no clear signature at all. How does a project that consumed generations of labor slip out of history without a name attached to it? What does it mean when something this big is also this anonymous? And the second, larger mystery, the one that swallows all the others. Why? Why would human beings do this? Carving a city this deep, this complex, this defensible, is not a weekend project. It represents an almost unimaginable investment of labor, sustained across lifetimes. People don't pour that kind of effort into disappearing underground unless the alternative, staying on the surface, is worse than the dark, worse than the cold, worse than sealing the door behind you. Something drove an entire population off the face of the earth and into the rock. And the scariest part is that Derinkuyu is not alone. Whatever the threat was, it was not felt by one town. It was felt across an entire region. We'll see why in a moment. No one knows for certain. All we have are theories. Which brings us to the second part of this video. Theory 1. A shelter from invaders. Start with the theory that fits the rolling stones like a key in a lock. Derinkuyu was a bomb shelter for an age of swords. Cappadocia sat on one of history's great highways, a crossroads that armies had been marching across for thousands of years. Whoever lived here watched empire after empire come through. Conquerors, raiders, tax collectors, slavers, and for a farming population with no walls high enough and no army big enough to stand against a professional war machine, there was one strategy that worked every time. Don't fight, disappear. When the watchman spotted dust on the horizon and approaching army, a raiding party the entire town could pour down into Derinkuyu, driving their animals ahead of them, carrying what they could. They'd roll the great stones shut behind them, seal each level, and simply cease to exist as far as the surface was concerned. The raiders would arrive to find an empty town. No people, no livestock, no plunder they could easily reach, and eventually they'd move on, because you cannot besiege what you cannot find. Christians hiding from Roman persecution, and later whole communities sheltering from centuries of raids and wars, are known to have used these cities for exactly this. It's clean. It explains the doors, the depth, the food stores. But it gets more interesting. Theory 2. Hiding from the climate. A second theory says the enemy wasn't an army at all. It was the sky. The rock of Cappadocia holds a remarkably stable temperature all year round, cool in the crushing heat of summer, and more importantly, warm relative to the brutal, killing cold of an Anatolian winter. Some researchers argue that at least part of the appeal of going underground was survival against a climate that could turn lethal. That these were as much refuges from weather and famine as from men. Underground, your food doesn't freeze and it doesn't rot. Your water doesn't ice over. Your animals and your family don't die in a blizzard. In a bad enough winter, or during a period of climate upheaval when the surface turned hostile, the Earth was simply the safest place to be. Not so fast, though. Theory 3. The Great Pantry. A more mundane theory. Derinkuyu, at least in large part, was about storage. That constant, cool, dry temperature isn't just good for surviving winter, it's perfect for keeping food. Grain stays good. Wine and oil keep. In a world without refrigeration, an underground complex is the finest pantry imaginable, and the sheer number of storage rooms, cellars, and presses at Derinkuyu lends this real weight. In this reading, The city began as a vast communal larder and cold store that a farming society expanded over time, and the sheltering function grew up around the food. Practical, unglamorous, possibly a big part of the truth. Theory 4. Something older and stranger. And then there's the theory that refuses to sit still, the one that looks at the sheer age and scale and asks whether we've badly underestimated the people who started it. If the Hittites, or someone even earlier, cut the first levels 4,000 years ago, then the origins of Derinkuyu reach back into the deep, dim edge of recorded history, a time we understand only in fragments. And Derinkuyu is not a lone marvel. It is one node in something much bigger, which we'll come to. To this camp, the anonymity, the scale, and the antiquity all point to a knowledge and an ambition in these ancient peoples far beyond what we usually credit them with, a civilization sophisticated enough to build a livable world beneath the earth, and then vanish from the story so completely that we can't even name them. Hold on to that thought, because it's where this ends. So there they are, 4 theories, from a shelter against armies, to a refuge from the sky, to a great buried pantry, to the fingerprints of a lost and underestimated people. Each one explains part of Derinkuyu, and each one, when you lean on it, leaves something unexplained. Let's do to these theories what Derinkuyu does to everyone who studies it. Take them apart. Start with the invasion shelter theory, the frontrunner. The Rolling Stones practically prove that defense was part of the story. You don't seal a door from the inside against the weather. But defense alone struggles to explain the full extent of the place. If you only needed to hide for a few days until raiders passed, why go 18 levels deep? Why the presses, the schools, the permanent infrastructure of a society that expects to live down there, not just crouch and wait? The doors say defense, but the depth and the amenities say something more permanent than a panic room. The theory is right and incomplete. Now, the climate theory. Stable temperature is a genuine advantage, and surviving winter underground makes sense, but cold alone doesn't explain the fortifications. A blizzard doesn't try to force your door. You don't need a 1-ton stone that locks from the inside or level-by-level choke points designed to trap an intruder to keep out the snow. The climate theory explains the comfort and the storage beautifully, and it completely fails to explain the paranoia carved into every sealed passage. Wrong, or at least not the whole picture. The pantry theory has the same problem in reverse. Yes, the storage is real and extensive, but you do not build a 20,000-person residential complex with kitchens, chapels, wells, ventilation, and defensive doors simply to keep grain cool. That's a city with a pantry, not a pantry that accidentally became a city. And the lost civilization theory, the most thrilling of all, runs into the oldest wall in archaeology. For all its scale, Derinkuyu is anonymous, but not alien. The tools were human tools. The crosses and inscriptions are human faith. Nothing down there requires a mystery. People with impossible knowledge, only ordinary people, terrified, working across an extraordinary span of time. Do you see the pattern? Every theory that explains the fear fails to explain the permanence. Every theory that explains the permanence fails to explain the fear. For 60 years, that's exactly where Derinkuyu has held everyone who descends into it, suspended between shelter and home, between hiding and living, unable to be just one thing. But we didn't climb all the way down here to leave it unresolved. Because if you stop arguing about which single threat drove people underground, and you step back and look at the one thing all these theories are forced to share, something enormous comes into focus. Something that turns a hidden basement into one of the most staggering discoveries of the century and delivers in full on what those archaeologists found when they lowered themselves through that hole in 1963. Here is what nobody disputes. Not the archaeologists, not the historians, not the geologists. Derinkuyu is real. It is 85 meters deep, and it was built to make 20,000 human beings disappear from the surface of the earth completely, with their animals and their food and their gods, and survive down there, sealed from the inside, for as long as the danger lasted. That is not a theory. That is simply what the place is. Whatever the specific threat, the design's purpose is not in doubt. Total, self-sufficient, hidden survival. Now follow that where it actually leads. Because here is the fact that took Derinkuyu from a local curiosity to a worldwide shock, the fact that most people never hear. Derinkuyu is not one of a kind. It is not even rare. Beneath the region of Cappadocia lie hundreds of underground settlements, by many counts more than 200 subterranean complexes carved into the same soft rock, ranging from small hideouts to sprawling multi-level cities. Derinkuyu is simply the deepest and grandest one we've found, and they are not all separate. Derinkuyu is connected to another vast underground city, Cappadocia, by a tunnel running something like 8 to 9 kilometers through the rock, meaning you could travel from one buried city to another without ever surfacing. Sit with what that means. This was never about one frightened town digging one hole. Beneath an entire region of Turkey lies a second, hidden country, a honeycomb of cities and tunnels and sealed doors, engineered so that whole populations could descend into the earth, seal the surface behind them, move between cities underground, and outlast anything the world above could throw at them. A civilization built a mirror of itself below the ground and learned over thousands of years how to vanish into it at will. And that is the shock those archaeologists really uncovered in 1963. They thought they'd found a cellar, then a city. And then, as the surveys spread out across Cappadocia, the true scale arrived. They had stumbled onto the largest and most sophisticated evidence anywhere on Earth of humanity's oldest, most desperate survival instinct, the instinct, when the surface becomes a place of death, to go down, into the dark, and endure. Not one family, not one town. An entire regional population, across empire after empire, century after century, rehearsing the act of disappearing from the world and living beneath it. Here's the part that should give you chills. This wasn't ancient superstition. It worked, and people kept doing it right up to the edge of living memory. The last inhabitants to use these underground cities as a refuge were Cappadocian Greeks, who fled into them to escape the violence of the early 20th century, and who finally abandoned Derinkuyu for good in the 1920s, when they left the region entirely. This buried world was still a working shelter within the lifetime of people's grandparents, and then it was simply forgotten, sealed, silent, erased so thoroughly that a man in 1963 could build a home directly on top of a city for $20,000 and never suspect a thing until his sledgehammer broke through the wall. And that is the final, staggering thought. If a metropolis 85 meters deep could hide beneath a living town until a chance swing of a hammer, and if it's only one of hundreds, most of them barely explored, then how much of that hidden country is still down there right now? Sealed, mapped by no one, its doors still closed from the inside by hands that turned to dust 1,000 years ago? We have walked a few cleared levels of one city. Beneath the rest of Cappadocia, the dark is still keeping its secrets. So the next time someone tells you we've mapped the ancient world, that the great discoveries are behind us, remember the man with the sledgehammer and the wall and the cold draft of an entire civilization breathing out of a hole beneath his basement. Remember that the people who built Derinkuyu were so good at disappearing that they very nearly disappeared from history itself. You've descended all the way down with me. You've seen the city, you've heard every theory, so I'll leave you with the only question that still matters. If an entire people learned to vanish into the earth to survive, and if most of that buried world is still sealed beneath Turkey, waiting, then what? Exactly. Were they so certain was coming? Let me know what you think it was. This has been Motech.